The big problem that people have in the West is that they regard it as a polar situation. You have yin on one pole, you have yang on the other pole. Exact opposite of what the symbol of yin and yang means. Exact opposite.
One of the big iconic aspects of Taoism is yin and yang. We see it in symbology, we see it in, pop culture, we see it a lot of places. What is it to a Taoist?
Okay, so first I'm going to do a quick cross promotion here. Go to watermountainvirtual.com and you will see yin and yang as it is drawn from the classics and applied to Qi. That talk I can't reproduce today because of the use of classical references. And so I have to be prepped to do that mentally. But let's address the issue because the symbol is used quite frequently within ritual traditions. And so it's something that people will have some curiosity about, depending on what temple level they're looking at and what their sect orientation is. And also, just your average Joe concerned about this or that.
Totally.
And so, first of all, in what context are you asking the question?
Well, let's take as you put it, the average Joe. He and she have seen the symbol, like I said, in pop culture all over the place, and they used and presumably misused. What's just in a general, broadest terms, how can we utilize the concepts of yin and yang?
Okay, so out of those mix of things, if you're thinking about importance to Taoism, what's most important to Taoism is Qi. And people don't realize that that Qi co-evolved with Taoism over time. That those within the Four Ascendant, the third sphere is the sphere of Qi. And the reason that it's significant is that it's the first time that people are dealing with non-human things. And so within the first sphere, the sphere of the social sphere, that's also known as the sphere of talk. It's the realm which is created by human interaction and exchange. On a verbal, moderately physical level. And then you have the second sphere, which is the sphere of the body or the sphere of the martial.
Right.
And that can override or destroy the sphere of talk pretty easily because you can say anything you want. But at the end of the day, a stick to the head is a stick to the head.
Right.
But those are all humans dealing with humans. They're not humans dealing with the external world outside of human experience. The sphere of Qi is the first place that humans truly deal with non-human things, things that are outside of them. And when we're dealing with Taoism, Taoism evolved as a method for dealing with things outside of humans. And we can't ever ignore that fundamental factor. That's what Taoism came about for. The other components of Taoism all came about for, well, this is the world outside of us. How do we make ourselves strong enough to deal within that realm? And eventually this would lead to the fourth sphere, the sphere of the Tao itself. So
that makes sense. That happiness and truth would be, because those exist outside of the human realms. So Taoism would evolve as a practice to interact with those. And when you said that that Qi evolved along with Taoism, does that mean the perception of Qi or the sensitivity to Qi?
our understanding of it.
Our understanding of it evolved with. Okay.
If you look at, and you still have this today, Qi, as it refined through the esoterics or through the alchemical traditions, it has very fine gradations and separations to it. In pop use, and actually this was true thousands of years ago without any exaggeration, the energies are all mingled together. So the practitioner can't discern between the major forces, how they're expressing, anything like that. So our understanding has changed over time.
Okay.
However, for an average person, their understanding is probably still locked back to where it was thousands of years ago. In part because Taoists have allowed that, and in part that's just the nature of how knowledge is transmitted. People start off with a very simple kind of rule of thumb series of things and then move to more defined elements. So with yin and yang, you have something that really emerged first as a Qi concept, which is the whole reason I had that Qi conversation.
Okay, yeah.
But it predates Qigong and likely comes from the early shamanistic proto-Taoist phase of Taoism. In part, we know this from petroglyphs, from a handful of archaeological finds, references within the texts, the oral traditions. The yin and the yang existed very early on as a way for people to try to understand the world. And so it was a way of organizing the cosmos, so it was what's called a cosmological concept.
Yeah.
And it was a way of understanding knowledge, so it was epistemological as well.
Right.
So it's a way of organizing information. And what you see with a lot of common use is that it's used as an organizational device, more than understanding it as a representation of force. Not physical force, but of force itself.
Okay.
And so that's a big difference. That's why you can see people saying, well, that's got to be the yin, that's got to be the yang, or the yin and yang, as it was up through the 80s.
Sure, yeah.
And
So a simplification of the passive and aggressive, or the active and the inactive.
well, let's sidestep that just for a second.
Okay.
If we're looking at it and we're setting aside the cosmological model, so we're not using it as a model, but let's use it first as a model.
Okay.
The big problem that people have in the West is that they regard it as a polar situation. You have yin on one pole, you have yang on the other pole. Exact opposite of what the symbol of yin and yang means. Exact opposite.
Okay.
The yin and the yang is designed to represent a continuum between two areas of high concentration. And so where one swirls and becomes the other, and it passes through gradations.
Okay.
So as an intentionally changing or continuum between high concentration areas, and even those little dots
Yeah.
within the yin and yang, which during the large pooling of it is meant to point out that, well, even at max yang, there is still yin.
Right.
And even at max yin, there is still yang. Within Western society, that becomes, there are these two poles. It's like, no, that is not at all what it is meant to represent. And it's a complete misrepresentation even of the basic cosmology.
Of course.
So that's that response.
If I can interject, I've seen very old representations of yin and yang. Sometimes they're missing the dots, and sometimes the tails are much, much longer and more spiral-like.
That's because I think it's called the Taichi line. The line between the yang and the yin is actually a dragon by old standards. So that is the realm occupied by the dragon. And that's why we have the dragon when it's represented. It is always in a curve.
Yeah.
It's the curve of the yin and the yang line. And as for the sun and moon not being present, That's a standard variation. It comes out of, I believe portion of it was in the Yellow Emperor's Classic of Internal Medicine. And where it was represented both as possessing yin inside of yang and without it. But the big change that happened over time, and you know it's newfangled because it was like 1000 AD, is that the yin and yang, which was sunny and shady, always had the landscape. So if we look over here, we can see the mountain descending, and that's like the rise of one portion of the yang. If we had the sun over on the other side in a shade, we would have the exact old meaning. And so it was a landscape position. Then in around 1000 AD, it flipped, and the yin portion being on the bottom and the yang portion being on the top. But that was the result of Confucian influence within Taoism, where the heaven side had to obviously be higher than the earth side, with the yin being the earth. And also, if it's male, if the yang is male, the male has to be in the superior position to the female.
Right.
And that's why that rotated in some sects, not in any of the ancient classic sects that lasted for thousands of years before the rewrite. So, and then of course, it was the landscape formation in the US until about the 80s or 90s, and then it flipped around and it went into the vertical orientation around that period of time. So,
by vertical, you mean that
where the yang is on top of the yin and the landscape is ignored.
Okay.
If you ignore the landscape, you in fact ignore the foundational description of yin and yang.
Wow.
The thing that was used to teach it for thousands of years. So that's the basic element of that. And now, so whenever you see the yin and the yang, what you're really seeing is an illustration that natural forces occur in a continuum between areas of large concentration. That's what it means.
Okay.
Now that can apply to energy states, so the nature of chi,
Right.
or it can apply towards reality. And the truth is, your average person in your average temple sect is not looking at the formation of reality, but that's what it was used to describe for most of its history.
By reality, you mean just like physical interaction, like the earth?
No,
Or
by reality I mean how energy becomes matter and how matter becomes energy.
oh wow.
So it has to do with something called the descent of the Qing, which we're talking classic old school esoteric stuff. So like how the universe formed, how the Tao chose to empower or shape the manifestation of the universe, different things like that. But in a nutshell, the yin and yang deals with the component of how does energy ultimately create matter, and it does it through what's called the descent of the Qing. So the yin and the yang represents a relatively, in most Qing scales, and there's more than one, and that creates some issues, but essentially the yin and the yang is a high state of differentiation where the Tao shapes itself into two subcomponents, and eventually at the lower levels this gives rise to matter. Before it does that, it gives rise to many different energy forms which are used to shape and form matter.
Wow.
And, well, I mean, you asked. That's not even concentrating on chi. If you want the chi explanation, go to watermountainvirtual.com. So, but that has to do with the way it was worked for most of the history of Taoism. Now, if you want to take that and move that into your daily life, this is how you do that.
Okay.
There are times where if you are a hard person, that you should be soft. And there are times where if you are a soft person, you should be hard. That's it. That's the thing that you should learn from yin and yang. That there is a time for both things, and these will pass through a continuum, a spectrum,
Yes.
where you are more soft than you are hard, and more hard than you are soft. And sometimes the way that we address ourselves or our problems has to be done with the thing that we are least compelled to do. So if you're a soft individual, then that will be the hard. If you are a hard individual, then that will be the soft. Each person, usually if they have that strong of an orientation, has an emotional bias towards one or the other.
Sure.
Oh, I'm weak if I'm soft.
Right.
Or,
right.
oh, I'm vicious if I'm hard.
Right.
And it's like, well, perhaps you should use what is available to you as a being within the universe. As humans have the ability to occupy more than one position within the yin to yang scale, and are benefited by doing so. Now you do have your nature, which is going to put you at some point, and by the way, all humans, you're not looking for perfect balance. All humans are yang slightly more in their orientation.
Okay.
If you're not, what will happen is you will get diseased. There's no doubt about it.
Okay, yeah.
I see it quite commonly, and it's one of the negative possible side effects of too much meditation. So, a person gets so yin that their yang is compromised.
Yeah.
But
okay, that's wow.
so, I mean, that's
in a
a
nutshell,
yeah.
What we can learn from yin and yang and how we can use it in our lives is to be flexible and maintain the capacity to act outside of our normal or our comfort zone.
Yeah, humans are oftentimes more than they allow themselves to be. So, you know, why cut off half the puzzle? And we have a capability of behaving in both fashions. Why would you want to eliminate one fashion? Now, it couldn't be because of social conditioning. You sit back and go, oh, this other alternative, whatever it happens to be, is horrible. Now, that could be the yang person looking at the yin person looking at the yang.
Yeah.
But the reality is, well, if you're going to approach it as a Taoist would approach it, you have to kind of allow yourself to be the other thing at least once in a while. Learn something from it. Kind of expand into your full human capability rather than allowing yourself to simply be a slice. And most of Taoist focus has been about allowing yourself to become complete rather than a slice of who you could be. And humans have the capability to simply be a slice if they want to. They'll ultimately end up being unhappy. If you look at most slice people, what happens is they die young. So as they start reaching a point of, well, if I continue doing this, I'll be unhappy. So then they die by happenstance or their own hand, one of the two. But, you know, if you want a long life, try to embrace your full self and use some of the features that are available to humans.
Yes.
So.
Excellent.